Hi, this is Melvin from ThatEconsTutor.com. I have my website here and you can see my picture there as well. I probably look a lot better back then compared to today. So good news for you, you won't be seeing my face in this video. Okay, why did I share this video? The purpose is really to respond to some students' queries. So some students have been asking me, from this topic on demand and supply, we learned a few concepts like number one, the factors that affect demand and supply. Okay, we also studied elasticity concepts and we came across examples of government intervention like a price ceiling, price floor, taxes and subsidies. Okay, so at the end of the day, we have covered these content, but what really matters? In other words, what can be assessed in the exams? Okay, what the students have narrated over here gives us the content, which is important. Okay, but to prepare yourself for the exams, you need to go one step further to look at the application. Okay, when I say application, I'm referring to these concepts above and how you apply them to answering exam questions. And I can tell you, for demand and supply, one of the key application areas, okay, is to be able to explain the impact on a market. All right. Now in microecons, when we talk about a market, there are only three ways to look at the impact. First, we consider how equilibrium price changes. Okay, following which we also want to see the change in quantity. And the last aspect pertains to the multiplication of P and Q, which gives us revenue. And this is the same as expenditure. And maybe just to give you a sense of how prevalent this question is, we can take a look at past year A-level questions. Okay, and what I've done here is to present a concept screener. So I look through past year questions and I sieve out the underlying themes. Okay, these are all denoted in red. For example, if you look at the 2013 essay, okay, students are asked to explain changes in the prices, okay, of private residential properties. So this pertains to impact on the market, and we're just focusing on P. Okay, going 1 year back, there are two parts to this question. You're either asked to study the impact on sales volume, which refers to Q, or the impact on revenue, which is revenue. Okay, the trend is consistent throughout the years. In 2011, they're silent on what to consider. You're only asked to explain effects on product markets. So since they don't specify which aspects to consider, you have to look at P, Q, and revenue, all three aspects. Okay, just a few more examples. 2010, impact on expenditure, which is the same as revenue. Okay, 2008, how the markets are affected. So we consider P, Q, and revenue. And in 07, impact on expenditure as well as quantity. Okay, so you can see quite clearly that a number of essay questions under this topic on demand and supply focus on the impact on the market. Okay, if that's the case, you know that this is how you apply the content. We need to come up with a methodology to answering these questions. And over here, I've come up with my own approach, which I call the FEEBLE approach. Okay, this acronym in no way describes the strength of this approach. Okay, what do I mean when I say FEEBLE? The first step is for you to identify the factors which affect demand and supply. Okay, so where do you get the factors? You go through the preamble, and they will probably tell you a story. Maybe there's a change in the cost of production or there's a change in income. So pull these factors out and link them to a shift in either demand or supply. Okay, once you're done with that, we need to study the relevance of elasticity of demand to our analysis. Okay, and as always, if you are checking the slope of your demand curve, you should not be shifting it at the same time. So what we should do here is to hold demand and combine it with the shift in supply, which you already picked up from step 1. Okay, when you're done with that, we go on to elasticity of supply. So same thing, you hold supply and you shift the demand curve. Okay? And of course, step 2 and step 3 will give you the isolated shift, which means you're shifting demand on the diagram or supply on the diagram separately. Step 4 requires you to combine the shifts and then to assess whether there's a bigger change in demand or supply. So you should combine the diagrams, okay? Because if you don't assess which curve shifts more, the impact on P or Q may be indeterminate. So this step is important, okay? Once you're done with step 4, step 5 is a standard step, okay? Which means you have to link in your adjustment to equilibrium process, okay, to explaining the diagram. And what we are explaining here is the combined shift diagram. Here. Okay? Once you're done with that, you're almost reaching the end of your analysis. Okay? The final step is an evaluative step where we'll consider aspects like, oh, could there be other possible values of PED or PES, which we have not considered in either step 2 or step 3. Now, this being evaluative in nature, you only need to explain the possibility of these values. You don't need to link the alternative values to the rest of your analysis. Okay? There's no need to carry out a full analysis with diagrams and all. So, other than considering alternative values of elasticities, you can also question, what if ceteris paribus doesn't hold? Okay? If ceteris paribus doesn't hold, then aside from a shift in demand and supply stipulated in step 1, there could be other shifts, possible combinations. Okay? Again, it suffices to sound out these possibilities. You do not have to show a complete analysis on this. Okay? Now, if you're fine, let me show you one example which I came up with myself. So this is it, a FEEBLE example. Now, suppose you're asked, okay, to discuss the impact of a global recession and higher steel costs on the market for cars. Okay, this is a 15-mark essay. And we can tell that this is also assessing the impact on the market. And since they only ask you for impact on the market, without specifying which aspect to consider, we will look at P, Q, and revenue. Alright, so we start with the first step, which is to identify the factors which affect demand and supply. So I take a global recession and I show that it lowers global income, okay, which results in a fall in the demand for normal goods. So we have the demand shift here, okay. Egypt is the acronym that I use, okay, to explain factors affecting demand. So you probably use a different one in your school, it's fine. After I consider the effects of a recession, I go on to the impact of higher steel costs. Now, when the cost of steel rises, the cost of producing cars will increase, and this results in a fall in the supply. Okay. Similarly, TAPES is an acronym that I use to denote factors that affect supply. So factors, we are done. Okay. Here, demand falls for normal goods while supply falls. Okay. After you are done with that, we need to consider step 2, elasticity of demand. And here, I say that demand for cars tend to be price elastic because it usually accounts for a significant portion of consumer income. And over here, PANTS refer to my PED acronym, which means PANTS refer to the 5 factors that affect PED. So we have a gentle demand curve here. Since it's price elastic, we present a gentle demand curve, okay? And we combine the slope of the demand curve with the fall in supply, which we identified in the first step, okay? Because to assess PED, we need to hold demand and shift supply. So this is what we have done here, okay? With a gentle demand curve and a fall in supply, we see a rise in price, a more than proportionate fall in quantity demanded, as well as a fall in total revenue. Okay? So that's your second step. In the third step, Okay, we will hold, since we are assessing PES here, we will hold the supply curve and we will shift the demand curve. So I've determined that the supply of cars tends to be price elastic because they're usually produced in factories, which relies on automation. So I have a gentle supply curve here. Being a price elastic supply curve, make sure it should cut above your x-axis. Okay, in the sense when you extrapolate your supply curve, it should cut above the x-axis. So I have a fall in demand coupled with a gentle supply curve, and this results in a fall in price, a more than proportionate fall in quantity supplied, as well as a fall in total revenue. Okay, so we are done with the first three steps: factors, elasticities, and both elasticities of demand and supply. Okay, we now move to the fourth step, where we need to combine the curves and see which curve shifts more. So over here, I suggest that the fall in demand may exceed the fall in supply, since a car could be a luxury good where YED is greater than 1. If YED is greater than 1, the fall in income results in a more than proportionate fall in demand. So now that you're done with assessing which curve shifts more, we need to link in the adjustment to equilibrium process, which I'll call ATE for short. Okay? And what happens in this step is you look at your final shift. Okay, you can see that the shift in demand exceeds the shift in supply. So we need to look at the new equilibrium of B versus A and explain how you move from point A to B. You can follow the reading, or rather follow the writing here. If you're not sure how to explain this, you can always drop me an email. I'll give you my details and then I'll explain to you separately. Alright, so from the final shift, you can see that equilibrium price and output both declined, okay, from P1 to P2 and Q1 to Q2. At the same time, total revenue falls from OP1 AQ1 to OP2 BQ2. So there you have it. You have your final impact on P, Q, and revenue all spelled out here. Okay. Excuse me. The final step simply requires you to acknowledge some possible limitations to your analysis above. And as I mentioned earlier, you do not have to flesh out a whole alternative discussion, all right, based on these limitations. So what we highlighted in the last step, okay, evaluation, is that PED, earlier on we said that PED is greater than 1, okay, because the car takes up a significant portion of income. But here, we acknowledge that some consumers need private transport, okay? To them, it could be a necessity. Maybe because they have an elderly whom they need to transport around, and public transport is probably not a good alternative. So in this case, PED is smaller than 1. Okay. Also, we assumed ceteris paribus. Okay. Other factors can also affect demand and supply. For example, if the price of fuel changes, or if the price of public transport is also changing. Now here I'm talking about prices of related goods. Okay, this could also affect either demand or supply of cars. Okay, so there you have it, the entire FEEBLE approach in 6 steps. Okay, so that's all I have to share with you in this video clip. Should you have further questions, okay, I invite you to either drop me an email, visit my website, you can type something in the chat window and I'll see it, or you can tweet me or drop me a message on Twitter. Okay, and I'll respond to your queries, and if you need one, I can probably do a video to explain what you need. Alright, that's all. Happy practicing. Thank you.